Okay, so today we're going to start with animation. I know back 12 weeks ago now, we did the solar system and we haven't really touched animation since then. So we're going to get into it a little bit more and actually talk about some of the principles of animation. We're going to get into the graph editor and how to not just set keyframes and make things move, but how to then modify those movements and refine them and get something that feels more natural. So I've got a brand new blank scene in Maya. I'm going to go to File and Set My Project. I'm going to use the same project that I've been using all semester, which is this one, and click Set. Then I'm going to Save As, and I'm going to call this Bouncing Ball, and click Save. Okay, so because this is beginning animation, and anytime you do beginning animation, the first thing you have to animate is a bouncing ball because that's the law of animation. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to work exclusively in the front view. Keep things simple. We're only going to animate, at first we're only going to animate along one axis, and then we're going to add a second axis, but that'll be the second time. So we're going to animate a ball. See the ball right here. And we're just going to make it bounce. First thing I want to do is actually, that's not the command, it's Option B. There we go. I'm going to use just the lighter gray background, I think. Yeah, we'll do the lighter gray. I'm going to use the x-axis here as my ground plane. I'm not going to actually add a ground plane because we're not going to see it in this view. But I'm just going to add it. And then because I want the ball to be sitting on the ground plane, I'm going to translate it up the y-axis 1 unit. So now it's sitting on the ground. Okay. Into the animating part of this, we need to move the sphere to its starting position. So I'm going to hit W. I'm going to move the manipulator up, bring it up. In this case 12 units. And now I need to set a keyframe. So there's a few different ways that you can set keyframes. Set a keyframe. You can just right click on the value in the channel box layer editor. Just right click and key selected. And that will set a keyframe on the translate Y value. You'll see you'll see this little red line. If you're using an older version of Maya, it'll turn the whole box red. But this is 2016 extension 2, and newer will just have this red line. So that's my first keyframe, and I'm at frame 1. I should have mentioned that before. Make sure you're at frame 1. I also have automatic keyframes turned on. So what this will do is, if I go to a different frame and move the ball somewhere, it will automatically set another keyframe, but just for that value, just for the Y. Even though I also moved it along the x-axis, because I didn't set a first keyframe for the x-axis, it's not going to create another keyframe. It's not going to automatically key it. So it's just going to set one for the Y. Now, I don't want to set it there, so I'm going to undo that. But that is what auto-keyframing does. That's how it works. First keyframe set. I've turned on Auto-Keyframe, and I've moved forward 10 frames. Now that I've moved forward, I'm going to have the ball fall down to the ground. You can, I suppose I should probably go over the animation interface since I haven't done that for 3 months. At the bottom of the screen here, you will see a timeline is indicated by all of these hash marks. Each number refers to the frame. The red line indicates that there is a keyframe on that frame. If I deselect the ball, you'll see that red line will disappear. I believe there's a setting that'll let you leave those keyframes on. Yeah, so you can say display key ticks for active from channel box, all. I just keep it to active. So yeah, if you have something selected and it has keyframes, they will show up on the frames that there are keyframes. Below that, we have our time slider range selector. We have 4 boxes and then a slider. So the outside boxes are your overall animation range. It goes from frame 1 to frame 200 by default. On the inside, these 2 boxes are the range that this slider will show. So by default, it's from frame 1 to frame 120, and you can see that is indicated here on the slider. So it's a 120 frame range that you can slide around if you want to see 81 to 200, or if you want to see frame 25 to 144, or whatever. You can change these values just by clicking in the box and typing in a different number. So if I want to change this to 150, there we go. You can also change the range selector just by clicking that lighter colored box and just dragging it. So if you really want to zoom in on just a couple of frames, click it, drag it in closer, drag it in further away, whatever you'd like to do. Let's see, over to the side we have animation layers, character sets. We're not going to worry about those. Here in the bottom right we have 2 icons. The first is Auto-Keyframe Toggle. This is an important one to know whether or not you have it on or off. If you have it on and you don't want it on, then you can get a whole bunch of extra keyframes that just muddy things up. And then to the right of that, we have the animation preferences shortcut. So you click that, it brings up your animation preferences. You can change your key tick size, so the kind of increment. So if we bring this up to, let's say 5, it's going to make this keyframe indicator 5 frames, or actually it's not 5 frames, it's just larger, so it's its own unit. I don't know, I've always kept it on 1. I don't really need any more than that. Also, we have, very important, we have playback. So looping, if you want to, how many times do you want to loop the playback? Oscillate is like ping pong, so it'll play it forward to the end. Once it hits the end, it'll play it backward to the beginning and then back forward. And then continuous will just keep looping it forever. And then playback speed. So if you have it set to play every frame, it's going to play the animation back as fast as your computer can handle it, which for these computers and for a lot of computers, especially with simple animation, is way faster than you want. So let's demonstrate it this way. So I'm going to move over to frame, let's say 30, and just move it over here. Actually, no, I lied. I'm not going to do that. I'll just bring it back down to the ground. So frame 10. I'm going to set the translate to 1, its starting value. Okay, so now I have 2 keyframes. And if I set the end of my animation to frame 10, and then hit play, because we've got our playback controls here, you see it's just looping forever. And if I go back to my settings, that's real time. So its base is 24 frames a second, so 24 frames is 1 second. If I set it to play every frame and click save, see, it's going to go a lot faster. It's just as fast as it possibly can. But you can also, if you really are trying to analyze a certain animation, play it at half speed and go really slow. So those are your options there. Set this back to real time. You can also, if you're in your animation settings, let's see, I thought it was in the animation settings. It's a time slider. The settings, the parent preferences, the settings, you can change your time base from film 24, which is what I'm going to keep it at, to NTSC 30, PAL 25, 15 frames. You know, choose what you want, but I'm going to keep it at 24. Click save. So I'm going to also set this back to the 150. We'll set the range to 120. That's fine. So I've got a keyframe on frame 1. I've right-clicked and key selectable. My automatic keyframes are on. I went to frame 10. I moved the ball down to 0, or actually to 1, so it's on the ground. So now I can move another 10 frames ahead, and I'm going to move the ball back to about halfway to from where it was. So in my case, that'll be right around 6. Okay, you can certainly turn on snapping, but I'm going to leave it off. It's not that big a deal. So translate Y. Actually, we'll go 6.5. And you see when I move it, that red line pops up telling me that it automatically added that keyframe. I can move another 10 frames down, move it back to the ground. To make sure that it is actually on the ground, I'm going to type in 1, hit return, move forward another 10 frames, move it about halfway what it was. So right about there. Another 10 frames, back to 1. I'm going to keep doing this until it's very slightly off the ground. This needs to be now at 1. Okay, and I think that'll be good. So at frame 90, it's back to 1. Okay. Now if I want to see how that looks like, I can just hit play. Okay, there's my play controls. So, we've got a ball, and it is kind of sort of bouncing, but it also kind of looks like it's on a rubber band. And the reason for that is timing is, the keyframes are telling it to move up and down. It's not behaving, it's not accelerating or decelerating the way that it would if there was actual gravity acting on it. And so to really visualize this and actually adjust it, we need to go into the graph editor. So I'm going to stop playback, and then on the panel layout presets here on the side, one of these has this little graph on it. That's the one you want to click. It's going to divide your view into 2 views. Your by default, a perspective, and then the graph editor. And this top one, I'm going to set to my front view. I'll kind of zoom out so I can see what's going on. On the bottom, here we have the graph editor. Graph editor is a perhaps deceptively powerful, but still very powerful tool for adjusting your animation and a lot of the properties of your animation. What it does is it takes the values that you're animating and it graphs them on an XY scale along the x-axis. This is your time. You see it will, just like your timeline, the numbers don't exactly match up, but as you go, this lighter vertical line is 0, and then 6 frames, 12 frames, and on and on. The vertical axis is the value. So in this case, it's going to be units because it's the translate. Okay, so if I zoom in here, and the controls to zoom in are the same as they are in the 3D viewport. Option right click will zoom in. You just drag your mouse left and right. Option middle mouse button will pan your view around. And you can't rotate because this is just a 2D graph. It's not a 3D thing, so you can't orbit your view around. You can also, we've got 3 little buttons up here. Okay, we have frame all, frame playback range, and center the view around the current time. So if I just click and move my time to, let's say, frame like 35 and click this 3rd button, it's going to move my view over so I can see what's happening on frame 35. Jumping back a little bit to the first one, frame all, it will frame all of the attributes that it's currently set to show. And then the middle one will frame the playback range. So if I set my playback range to like the first 50 frames, okay, this range right here, and click that button, it will just show me the first 50 frames. Okay, so that's how you can navigate around your graph editor and what it does. On the left here, it will show you whatever objects you have selected and whatever attributes of those objects that have keyframes that you're actually animating. Okay, so right now, we've only set keyframes on the translate Y value, so that's why we only see that graph in the chart. I'm just going to scrub through the timeline here so you can see how this chart is affecting or is representing what the ball is doing. So it starts all the way up here at 12. So I'll actually zoom out my viewport here. As I move to frame 10, you can see the value, in this case, the units, the keyframe is set at 1. You can see up here, translate 1. That's that value represented. And as I move over and go to frame 20, you can see on the graph it's showing just over 6, and that is in fact what my translate y is. So it is a direct representation. Now, you'll also notice we've got, on this graph, we've got little dots. When they're unselected, they're black. When you select them, they're yellow. These are your keyframes. These keyframes are not locked in position in the graph editor. You can move them just in the graph editor. So I can select my first keyframe and go to frame 1 here. And as I move it, so I'm going to hit W to bring up my move tool and just middle click and drag in the viewport. You can see as I move it up and down, it does change the height. It's moving that value. If I move it left and right, it's not changing the height, it's changing the frame that height happens. Okay, so if I go to, let's say, this is frame 20, and if I move this over to the left, well, now it's going to hit that height of just over 6, 7 frames earlier than it did before. Okay, so you might be tempted to think that it's going to move it left and right. That's not how it works, because you're only adjusting the Y value over time. Okay. You'll also notice if you've done any work in maybe Photoshop or Illustrator or After Effects or Premiere, we've got these points have handles. Okay, and these handles adjust the angle, the slope of the curve. And we've got a few different controls. One thing that we can do is we can just select one and hit W and move it, and it kind of adjusts the angle, the slope. And what this does is it affects the speed and the rate of change. And I'll get to that actually right now. I think is a good time to do this. So what I'm going to do, whoops. So I'm going to add another sphere. Actually, let's not do a sphere. Let's do a cube. Or a cone, because that's interesting. All right, so I've got a cone here, and I'm going to set a keyframe for the translate X, and then I'm going to move it all the way over here. Whoops. Got to change frame first. Actually, see, you got to pay attention to your frame numbers. Set a keyframe on frame 0 for the cone. I'm going to move it all the way over to the other side after I change the frame. So let's go to frame 20. Yeah, we'll go to frame 30. I'm going to move it all the way over here. Okay. So I've got one object. It's got 2 keyframes. It's got this default curve. Now I'm going to bring my range slider down. I'm going to frame it up. I can also frame up the whole thing. And we have this curved, well, it's a curved curve, really. It's a curved line, and it starts out flat, which means the first few frames, it's not really changing its position very much. Okay, it's changing maybe half a unit. But then as that curve gets steeper, its rate of change is going up. Okay, it's moving further in a shorter amount of time. And then towards the end, it slows down. Okay, so if you have a completely horizontal curve, that's going to be no change. If you have a completely vertical curve, it's going to basically disappear and reappear somewhere else. All right, and then you can kind of change that in between. So if I select this first point and, select the first point, hit W to bring up my move tool. There we go. And now if I rotate that so the curve looks like this, curve, it's going to start out at a pretty decent speed, and then as this curve kind of flattens out, it's going to slow down to almost 0 and not move much for the last maybe half of the animation. So we can watch that back. Okay. And here, let me change the color of this cone so that we can see it a little bit better. We'll make it blue. not quite that blue. Okay. And I'll deselect that. Oh, I can't really deselect it because then you won't be able to see it. Okay. So you see, and again, because this curve actually goes above the ending keyframe, it's got this little settle motion into it, which this settle is kind of nice, but this isn't the way that we want to do it because we don't have as much control. So we'll actually want to, if you want to settle an animation, you're going to want to put a keyframe there to settle it in. You don't want the curve to kind of go over it and then back in. But you can see how that is, you know, how the slope affects the speed. So I could likewise change it and go, whoops, select that, bring that down, and I can select this and bring this down. And now what's it going to do? Exactly. So this is going to start out barely moving, and if anything, it's going to move back a touch. And then as it'll start to pick up speed, and as it gets to the end, it's going to stop really suddenly. And we can watch that back. It's like it's hitting a wall. That you can do with curves, and it's not just slow beginnings or slow stops. One thing you can do, if we select these keyframes, we've got some kind of preset shapes here. We have auto tangents, which is the default, which was that kind of slow start, speed up, and then slow stop. It's that ease in, ease out. Up next we have spline tangents, which are basically the same. It just gives you more control over them. We have clamped tangents, which I'm not entirely sure the difference. Forgive me. I don't remember that definition. We have linear tangents, which, if I undo this, so if you set something to linear, you're making it that straight line. And so if something is linear, with a constant curve, a linear tangent, it's going to suddenly start, it's going to move at a constant speed, and then it'll suddenly stop at the end. And we can watch that back too. So it just moves and stops. Very, very mechanical and rigid. Up next we have a flat tangent. So if you want something to ease into 0, just select that keyframe and just click flat tangents, and then you can see it'll start linear, so it'll be a sudden start at a constant speed, and then it'll slowly start kind of slowing down. Let's see. And then up next we have step tangents. So this is what I was talking about, where if it's a completely vertical line, it means it's just jumping around. So if I select that keyframe, click step tangents. Okay. So this affects the curve after the keyframe. So we need to actually select the first keyframe, click step tangents, and now you can see this is what the graph is. And so what this is going to do is, yeah, it's just going to teleport. So just move. And move. Okay. And if nothing, after a step tangent, you can see there's no keyframes after that, and this applies to any curve type. But if there's no keyframes after a certain point, it's just going to stay wherever it was, unless you do an infinity. So every curve has an infinity, and you can tell it at the end of this whole curve animation business. You can tell it to repeat that. You can tell it to repeat it from the end point. You can tell it not to do anything. It does nothing by default. But you've got some options there. And then the last one is plateau tangents, which actually I'm not familiar with. Oops. We'll make that smooth. Yeah, I'm not honestly not familiar with plateau tangents. I'm sure I could look it up real quick, but I'm not going to right now. So those are our main options for adjusting these, and that's kind of how the curves will represent the action. And as we work with it, it'll get more clear, I promise. Then I think that'll be it for now. We will definitely be coming back to the graph editor here in a moment. But I'm going to delete that cone because I don't need that anymore. Now I've got just my bouncing ball. going to frame it up. And that's right, we actually are going to stay with the graph editor. So let's look at this bouncing ball and kind of figure out what's wrong with it, what needs to change. It feels like it's on a bungee or on a rubber band. It's if this is a ball that's being dropped, it should be accelerating towards the ground, and it should hit the ground and bounce off, and then at the top it should ease. So that's what we need to try to get happening here. And so to do that, there's a new thing you need to know. And that is we need to adjust the graph, because right now we can see, and as we saw before, I'm going to actually bring this in and kind of zoom in here just on the beginning. As the ball is falling towards the ground, it picks up speed, but then it slows down. And what we want it to do is to hit the ground suddenly. We need to change the tangents of our bottom keyframes. And there's this handy button right here called Break Tangents. When you click on that, you select the keyframe, click on that, and it's going to split the tangent into two different colors. From there, you can select one. Again, hit W for your move tool, and we can bring this up. You don't want to bring it up too far. You don't want to bring it up so much that the curve goes up, because what this means is if I let this animation go, the ball is actually going to almost jump into it, which we don't want to do for this, because we're going for a more realistic physical drop and not, a more cartoony type of thing. So I'm going to frame up everything, and I'm going to just middle click and drag on that and bring it so that it starts fairly flat and then falls down towards the ground. And I can do the same thing with the next handle, so that when that comes up, it also stays kind of flat. There we go. And then I can select all of the other bottom keyframes, and I'm going to break those tangents too, and then move them so we get that acceleration and deceleration. Again, just middle click and drag on those handles once you break the tangents and bring them up. Just trying to get that right motion. And for these back keyframes, it looks like I'm just going to need to zoom in a little bit. So I'm going to bring my range slider in so that I can see the end and frame up just that back part. Do that again. There we go. By the way, if you option right click, shift option right click, you can zoom in just on one axis. So if I shift option right click and drag vertically, I can see these curves in a more dramatic manner, which allows me to be a little bit more exact with how they manipulate. So get this last one in there. Oops. Okay. Now I can see the whole curve. Now it looks something like this. And we're not there yet, but it's definitely going to look better now. So let's come back and look at this animation. And I'm going to actually turn this blue as well so I can see it better. Okay. I think I'm just zoomed way out. Oh, I know what's happening. Maybe. Yeah, I think I set the range. I'm going to set since the animation ends at frame 90, I'm going to set the end of my animation to frame 100. There we go. There we go. See, it falls, and it feels, that bounce has more weight, it has more energy to it. Forgot to mention in the graph editor for this acceleration down is you need to make sure I'll bring this up a little bit larger. You probably need to set your bottom keyframes here to linear, just the bottom ones. Because if you have them at, let's say, Auto Bezier, which is what it starts at by default, and you break the tangents and you move them, it may not be as smooth at the bottom here as it, or not as smooth, as sharp and as abrupt at the bottom as you want it. So then you click on linear, and it'll really make sure that that stays nice and sharp. It looks like it is already, at least on mine. So once we have that kind of acceleration feeling better, the next thing we can look at is the timing of everything, and how if we watch this, all the wrong things. If we watch this bounce back, and Option V is the key command for playback. I know it's not intuitive, but as we watch this play back, the first bounce feels pretty good, but as it bounces less and less, it's still taking the same amount of time, which is obviously not what we want. So that's what we need to adjust next. We are going to first stop the playback, go back into the graph editor, frame up everything, and I'm just going to select all of these keyframes, and I'm just going to move them. I'm going to hold down the shift, middle click and drag, and move them a couple frames over to the left. Deselect, and I want to try to keep these arcs even. All right, and as the bounces get shorter, the time in the air should also be shorter. So it looks about right there. Okay, something like that. And we can play this back and see how that looks. Okay, that's feeling pretty good. But we could probably bring in these last keyframes a little bit more to make sure that it really kind of bounces and resolves a little bit cleaner. We have a pretty standard bouncing ball. It drops from a height, it bounces, and then it stops. But we can definitely make this a lot more interesting. Well, as interesting as a single bouncing ball can be. We're going to add not just vertical movement, but horizontal movement. We're going to add squash and stretch, and we're even going to do a little bit of rotation. And to do that, we're going to start with a brand new ball. The other bouncing ball, all of my hard work is gone forever. I'm going to add a new one, and I'm going to name this. I didn't name the last one. I'm going to name this one. I'm going to name it ball. Okay. I'm going to right-click on the ball, assign existing material, and I'm going to assign my blue material. And then I'm going to go into my faces, and I'm going to select, the middle. I did it again. I'm going to select the middle 4 rings, and assign a new material. That's not how you do that. Right-click, assign new material. It's another Lambert, just a really simple material, and I'm going to make this red. We'll make it this red, but we're going to make it a little bit darker, slightly faded. Okay, so there's my ball. I've made this band so that when I start adding rotation, I can tell that it's rotating without actually having to have it selected. It's just more aesthetically pleasing to me, although if I'm really being picky, and when am I not, I'm going to select these outer bands and add another material. Again, this is entirely unnecessary. It doesn't actually help you with the animation, but I like things to look decent, so I did that. Now that's not better. I'm going to undo that. Actually, we'll just make it a better color. How about green? That's better. Okay, so I have a ball. I need to move this up again. So that's sitting on the floor-ish thing. So translate Y, 1 unit. I also, and this time I'm going to add a ground plane. So I'm going to click on the plane option, hit R to scale that way up. Okay, so now I have a ground plane, which is lovely. Last thing I want to do before I start animating is I want to freeze the transformations. And so what that's going to do, if I select the ball and I go to modify and freeze transformations, watch the channel box. Right now the translate Y is at 1. When I click freeze, it's going to set that back to 0. Okay, this is a very kind of simple use case for it, but it's a great thing to be able to do when you know you're about to animate something and you want its current location to be its default location, to be its home location. What I'm going to do is we're not actually going to animate the ball. We're going to animate basically nulls. We're going to group the ball like we did way back 3 months ago with the solar system. We're going to add groups to the ball and we're going to actually animate those groups. And it's going to allow us to have a little bit more specific control and animate channels without affecting other things. So the way that we're going to do that, same way that we did them before, I'm going to select the ball, I'm going to hit Command G to group it, and this first group I'm going to call rotate. Okay, I'm going to group it again with the rotate group selected. So here's my outliner so you can see this. We've got the ball and we have the rotate. It doesn't look, when I have them selected, it doesn't look like I'm changing selections, but I am. So make sure you're paying attention to what you have selected. We want to select the rotate group and group that and call that new group scale. And then we're going to select that group it again, and we're going to call it translate. Okay? And again, in the outliner, if I hit Shift and select and click on the plus, you can see the whole hierarchy here. Okay. So it's going to be very helpful to keep the outliner up on the screen as we're working. I'll have mine on the other monitor because I've only got so much real estate. Also know that when you select the ball, if I deselect and then reselect it, it says ball is selected. If I want to choose one of those groups, I can use the up and down arrows to move up and down the hierarchy. Okay, so watch the outliner as I hit up and down arrows. I'm moving up and down that group's hierarchy to choose whatever channel that I want. Okay, so make sure you're paying attention to what that is. Now, we can start animating. So I'm going to jump into my front view. So I'm going to go to Panels, Orthographic, and Front. Oops, there we go. All right, and I'm going to position my axis off to the side here because the ball is going to start up here and then it's going to bounce and it's going to bounce and it's going to bounce and bounce and bounce and roll and bounce and it's fine. Okay. So we need to go to our starting position. I'm going to hit W. Again, I have the translate group selected. For animating the translation, we should have the translate group selected. This is why we name things. I'm going to bring it to its starting position, which in this case is all the way up here at, we'll go 10, value of 10. All right, now, what I want to do is I need to set keyframes for both the X and the Y position. So I could right-click on each of the channels and say key selected, or here's a shortcut. I can hit Shift W. When I do that, it's going to set a keyframe. Oops. Make sure you're on frame 1 and then hit Shift W. It's going to set a keyframe for all of the translation channels, right? So when we're modeling, W is the key command, is the shortcut for move, and E is the shortcut for rotate, and R is the shortcut for scale. Well, if you hit Shift and W, it's going to set a keyframe for all of the translation values, all the move values. Shift E is going to set a set keyframes for all of the rotation values, and Shift R is going to set a keyframe for all of the scale values. Okay? And because I have automatic keyframing on, once I set the first keyframe, from there on, it'll automatically add additional keyframes as I move the ball around. Okay? So, that's my first keyframe. Now, again, I'm going to move 10 frames into the future. And I'm going to grab this little blue box and I'm going to move it in both directions at the same time. I need to move it so that the Y is down to 0, because it's going to... Actually, that's not true at all. Because we're going to add squash and stretch, I'm actually going to move it slightly below the ground. Because when we add the squash, when it hits the ground, because it's going to be a rubbery ball, it's going to squash to the ground. That in position. Now, I'm going to... I've moved it roughly 3 units in the X direction. Almost exactly. Now I'm going to bring it up. And we'll bring it up about 2/3 of the way, so roughly 6.5. And in the X value, we'll move it a little less than 3 more. Okay, again, because we've got the graph editor, we're not tied to any of these values. I'm just trying to establish something in my head so that as I'm going, it's not way out of whack. Also, some of you caught it. I certainly didn't. Before you move it again, change your time indicator. Make sure you're on the next frame. So, frame 20, now I'll move it back to where it was, so about 6.5 and 5.5 or so. Okay, and then I will move it 10 more frames. I'll move it back below the ground, not quite as far below the ground as I was before, but still below the ground. And I will set this, I don't know, to right about here. Okay, another 10 frames. And I was at 6, so I'm going to go to about 4, a little over 4. Something like that. Okay. At this point, it's getting kind of, it's tough for me to remember exactly where I was without having to scrub through the timeline a bunch. So if I go to my animation tool shelf, I've got some key shortcut tools here. That's the word I'm looking for, tools, that will help me figure out what I'm doing. 2 main ones are motion trails and ghosting. So if I turn on motion trails, it's going to show me actually where my keyframes are and show me the path of where this ball has been. If I turn on ghosting, objects could not be found to ghost. Well, that's odd. The ghosting, the reason why the ghosting didn't work with the translate group is because the translate group is just a group. Okay, there's not actually a mesh on that level of the hierarchy. So if I go down to the ball and select ghosting, you can see that the ghosting happens. And what the ghosting is, it's also onion skinning. It's showing you kind of a translucent history of where the ball has been. Okay, and that you can adjust those options too. So if I go and I change my menu set from modeling to animation, and then I can go, let's see, it is in the visualize menu. We've got ghost selected. Okay, that's the same as that clicking that icon, but you can bring up the options. Okay, and we can change exactly how. We could say custom frames. We could say keyframes. If we click apply, now we can see the ghost in all of the keyframes. All right, so you've got those options there. I'll close that. So I'm going to turn off ghosting, but I will keep the motion trail on just because it'll help me kind of visualize where I want to be. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my translate group, okay, and continue blocking out this animation, all right? Just kind of setting the broad strokes. Whoops. Yeah. So we'll go there. We'll move it 10 frames. We'll go down. About there. See, that's a little too far over. Go 10 more frames forward. Go to about there. No. So if we were at 4, then we're going to go down to like, yeah, 1 point, or no, 2.8 or so. Okay, 10 more frames, and I will continue this. I'll pause the recording so you don't watch me just move the ball around on the screen. But hopefully you will also continue to animate. So I have finished blocking in my bouncing ball animation. And we can see we've got the same problems that we had before in that it doesn't actually hit the ground. It just kind of floats. So let's fix that next. So what I'm going to do is stop my playback. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to go to my graph editor. Now you can see that because I have multiple channels keyed and multiple values, the X and the Y, I now have 2 graphs in my graph editor. I have my X and my Y. Now I can just select one or the other, and it will show me just that. Or I can click on the translate, and it'll show me everything. I'm just going to worry about the Y for now. And I'm going to frame everything up. And I'm going to click and drag and just select all of the bottom keyframes. And I'm going to set them to linear tangents. And when I set them to linear, you see that the handles move in roughly the right position. But as I move one, the other one moves as well. And this is where we need to do what I said before with the break tangents. So I'm going to select them all again, all the bottom keyframes, and I'm going to click on the break tangents icon. Okay, and that will let me select one, hit W to move it, kind of adjust that so it's more of a gradual start there. Something like that. And I'll go through and adjust all of these. Shift option right click and drag vertically to kind of accentuate the graph so you can get a better sense of how your curves are behaving and the shape that you're creating. Okay, I'm almost done here. But as you get down to the smaller curves, it can be really helpful to expand that out a little bit more. Okay, almost there. I'll really expand this out for this last one. May have gone a little too much. There we go. Oops. Okay. I'm gonna reframe everything. And actually, what I'm gonna add one extra keyframe at the end here. So the animation will go all the way to 160 currently. And that's because it's gonna, once it's done bouncing, I still want it to roll a little bit. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of translation there. Okay, so that's it for the bottom parts of the translation graph. The top keyframes here, I'm going to just click on the flat tangents. Just make sure they should already be there by default, but just want to make sure that they're there. They are there. Now, let's kind of zoom out here. I'm going to turn off my motion trail. Maybe. Turn off my motion trail. Okay. Oh. There we go. So when I was adding motion trails, they pop up in the outliner. See all of these. I'm just going to delete them. Bye-bye. Okay. So now I've got my animation blocked in. Let's play that back. All right, that's feeling okay. The next thing that I want to do, so there's a couple things that we still need to do. One is obviously it's going below the floor, so we'll have to, when we add the squash and stretch, that will resolve that problem. The other thing, excuse me, is that the bounces, again, as they get smaller, they're still taking the same amount of time, so we need to move those in, and that's what I want to do next. So I'm going to select and show both of my translate X and my translate Y keyframes, because I don't want to forget the X as I'm moving them, because I want the whole keyframe to move. And the way that I'm going to do this, I'm just going to kind of do what I did before. I'm going to just slowly move these in. I'm going to hold down Shift before I middle click and drag, and that will lock it to either the left and right or up and down. If I hold it after, it won't work. So hold down Shift beforehand, middle click and drag, move to the left a couple of frames, and then we'll deselect that last one, bring it in some more, and just kind of work my way down the line and keep going here. As we get in smaller, I can reframe everything again. Okay, and these last few are going to be pretty short bounces. I'll probably have to even bring them in more, but I'll bring this last keyframe in a little bit more too. Roughly positioned, I'm going to watch it back. Let me select my translate so we can see the graph. There we go. I hit play, watch it back. One more time. Still feels like some of these take a little bit too long. I'm going to move them in a little bit more. And really what I should be a little bit more particular about the spacing here. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to eyeball it. But if you zoom in, you can really keep track better of how far apart all of your keyframes are. Actually, that needs to move in a little bit more. Okay, so one of the things that I'm looking at here is it's the space between the bounces. And as the bounces get shorter, then the space between them should also get shorter. And so if we look at this bounce is about, let's say, from frame 47 to 58, so that's 11 frames. And this bounce right here is 8 frames, 72 to 80. The bounce right before it is 6 frames, so 66 to 72. So this bounce is too long because it shouldn't be a longer bounce after a shorter bounce. So I'm going to select that last one. Whoops, undo, hold down Shift, bring that in. It's better. It's still 6 frames, so I'm going to just bring that one in a little bit. Bring that one in a little bit too. Okay. Now, one thing that I didn't do is I didn't select the my top keyframes as I was moving all of that, like I should have. So I'm going to quickly realign those so that these line up. What I want to do here, just for the sake of cleaning this up, so if we look at my translate X, we've got a bunch of keyframes and it's not a very smooth line. One of the ways that you can help smooth it out is just by selecting all the keyframes that you don't need and deleting them. There shouldn't be a change in horizontal motion when it's in the air. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to select all of the keyframes that are while the ball is in the air, which is every other, and just delete it. It's going to smooth out the graph a bit. Okay, that'll look better. And then also, you can select them and hold down Shift and middle click and drag and move them up and just kind of manually make that a smoother transition, because it should be, right? It should smoothly decelerate and not be all kind of herky-jerky. So now that I've done that, I'm going to play it back. And you can see that now I've got a bunch of extra frames because I've sped everything up. So I'm going to set the end frame of my animation to 90 now. Okay, now hit play. We'll zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole thing. All right, that's looking pretty good. I think now it's about time to add some squash and stretch. So I'm going to stop the playback. And now, for the squash and stretch, that transformation is a scale transformation. So I'm going to select my scale group node. All right. And now, I'm going to move my time slider, figure out where it's below the ground. All right. So this is where I want it to obviously squash, because it's going to be a soft ball. It's going to hit the ground. It's going to pancake a little bit. So I'm going to go to that frame. I'm going to scale it down. But when I scale it down, I've got a problem. That problem is that it's scaling to the bottom of the ball and not to the center of the ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the ball. I'm going to go to Modify and Center Pivot. Just going to snap that pivot right to the center of the ball. And now I can continue with my plan. So now I can scale it down. I'm just going to scale it down vertically, just in the y-axis. And I'll scale it down until that's right on the ground. You can zoom way in if you want to be really precise about it. Okay. And then I'm going to hit Shift E. No, I'm not. I'm going to hit Shift R to set a keyframe for my scale values. Now, there's a couple of things that I've done wrong. Is that I didn't set a keyframe in its starting state, right? It's just now that I've set this keyframe where it's squashed, it's always squashed. And I've made a bouncing, I don't know, pile of dough? Football? Yeah, I guess football is a more reasonable explanation, not a pile of dough. Weird. Yeah, so that's the first problem. So if I go to frame 1 and change my scale Y to 1, okay, now it's back to normal. But I've got another problem. It squishes immediately. It immediately starts anticipating that it's going to hit the ground. It's like it's recoiling before it hits. Which if you've got a character and they are sentient and aware that that's happening, that might be something that they do. For this inanimate object, that does not have that ability to anticipate that's going to hit the ground. So we need to fix that. One thing I could do is undo this keyframe, move to that playhead, and then add that keyframe back. Or I could just get in close here. And all right, I don't know. What is this keyframe doing? I'm just going to delete it. I don't know what that... Oh, I do know what that keyframe was. That was my other two values. I'm going to get in close here on my scale Y, and I'm going to change that from happening on frame 1 to happening just before it hits the ground. So I'm going to hold down Shift, or hit W for my move, hit Shift, middle click and drag, and move it over to frame 9. Okay. Now I'll maximize my view again, and I'll scrub through it. Okay. So the frame before, it is full size, and the frame when it hits, it squashes. Excellent. And now, what we need to do is we need it to return to its full size. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 frames later. And we'll set that scale value back to 1. Okay, now we can scrub through and see how that reacts. Right here, hits the ground, squishes. 3 frames later, expands out to full. Now, as I play this back, and I'm just going to set my range way down so we can just focus on this bounce, right? All right, that feels more alive than it did. We can add a little bit more to it. And so we've done the squash. Now we're going to do the stretch. And I'm just going to go to right about to frame 12. Select my scale Y value, and I can either just grab the manipulator, or I can just, with the value selected, middle click and drag in the viewport. And I'm going to scale it to about 1.2 in the Y direction. Okay, so it's going to hit, and then it's going to rebound off, and then return to its regular size. So now let's watch that back. It's quick. We'll play it back at half speed, and we'll watch it again. And actually, I think that's happening too late. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to move it a frame earlier. Okay, now let's watch that back. Yeah. All right, let's watch that full speed. Click save. Yeah, it's quick. It's not super exaggerated, super cartoony, but it still gives it more life to this bouncing ball. So we're going to do that, and we're going to do that for all of the remaining bounces. The last couple of bounces that I animated, I didn't actually have the ball go through the ground. I figured by that point, the amount of force that it's hitting the ground is not enough to actually deform the ball. Again, I'm just kind of imagining this is a pretty standard rubber ball, not doing anything special with it. So I'm going to stop that recording, or stop the playback, and go through and continue to animate. So I'll go to my next frame where it goes through the ground. I'm going to go back 1 frame, and I will hit Shift E. Whoops, no, not Shift E. I always want it to be E. Shift R. Okay, to keyframe that scale. I will move forward 1 frame. Okay, to frame 30, and I'll zoom in here and scale it down so that it's not going through the ground, but it's right on it. Okay. Then I will move a frame ahead. We'll scale it up. A couple more frames, and we'll set it back to 1. Okay, so now, come on, there we go. I've got 2 bounces. Actually, I could probably exaggerate that a little bit more, but we can adjust that in the graph editor later. So I'm just going to go through and get all of these squash and stretches in place. My bounces in place, and as I'm looking at them, I want the early bounces to be a little bit more exaggerated. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to move my stretch frame over 1. I'm going to move my rebound frame, and then I'm going to exaggerate my stretch even more. So instead of it just being 1.2, I'm going to go to like 1.4, just to really get a sense of it. Oftentimes in animation, exaggerating is going to make it feel more real. You know, even especially, and we're not doing character animation this time around, but especially with character animation, it's exaggerating the motions that really brings the life into it, even if it's not physically possible. If you just do motion capture data and apply it to a rig, it feels a little flat and stale. So adding that exaggeration just helps with the life of it. I'm going to expand this one out one more frame as well. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. I don't want to scale it, I just want to move it. Okay, cool. So now you can see what my graph looks like for that. And if I select both my translate and my scale groups in the outliner, you can see what the whole thing looks like. And let's play it back. Oh, I needed to play back the whole thing, so I'm going to stretch out my range slider so it plays the whole thing. Okay, there's a little hiccup. I feel like probably this bounce right here takes a little too long. So again, I can just go back and with all of the keyframes illustrated, I can pretty easily, whoops, make sure you have W to move, go back and just make those adjustments. That's better. Okay, it's a continual process of refining and then checking it and seeing how it responds. So now that I've got this in place, the last thing that I want to do is my rotation. Okay, so for that, I'm going to select the rotation group. Whoops. I'm going to go to frame 1, and I'm going to hit Control E, not Control E, Shift E, excuse me, Shift E, set my initial starting keyframe, and then I'm going to go to my last keyframe, which I need to remind myself what it is. It appears to be frame 84. Okay, go back to my rotation node. And I want to rotate around the Z-axis. It's rolling this way. Now you can see as I roll, the pivot is wrong. So before I do that, I need to go up to Modify and Center the Pivot. Then I'm going to set my rotation Z to some interesting number. Let's say 630. Why not? Okay. Now, what we have here, if we graph it, we have a rotation that will ease in, so the rotation will start very slow, and it'll pick up rotation, and that will slow down. And we don't want that. It doesn't really make sense for what we're doing. So I'm going to go to my first frame, just the first frame, the first keyframe, and I'm going to set that to linear. I still want it to slow down because, I mean, that's how it's going to work. And this is rotate Z is what I'm worried about. As it's rolling at the end of the animation, it will slow down. It's the friction on the ground that slows it down. So I still want this part right here, but I don't want it to start slowing down immediately. I want it to start and keep a constant speed for a little bit and then gradually slow down. So once I add that and maximize, go back to frame 1, zoom in here a little bit, and hit play. And it appears as though I've rotated in the wrong direction. And that's because I need to put a negative on that. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to go to frame 84, and then not 630, but negative 630. Hit return, and play it back. Whoa! There's a little bit of an error there, I think. Yeah, I didn't make it better. So I need to investigate what looks like this area right in here. Yeah, it's so we're zooming in and kind of looking at, if we go from frame 30 to 37 and 37 to 43, that's 7 and 7. No, it's not. It's 7 and 6. And then we go 43 to 49, so that's 6 frames up. And then 5 frames down. I think we just need to bring all of these over one frame. Watch that back and see how that affects it. I think, yeah, and then also I just need to spread this out a little bit. So again, a little bit of trial and error, watching it back and being able to look at what you have going on and really evaluate it and figure out what's working, what isn't working, and then how you can adjust that and fix it. So I'm going to flatten these out a little bit. I think that's also part of it, is these just need to get a little bit flatter. So I'll bring those up a little bit more too. And that is animating a rubbery bouncing ball. So the last little bit, oh, it looks like at the end here, it's not quite at 0. I'll grab my translate, make sure that these always return to 0. Looks like they got nudged a little bit before. We don't want it floating. There we go. That's better. Just like that. So next week we will talk about applying animation to other things. Talk about animating cameras, lights. We'll probably do another animation exercise with a swinging chain, and also talk about animating along a path, establishing a path for something to travel, particularly a camera, but it can be really anything.